Good morning and welcome to the launch of the 5th European Market Monitor on Energy Storage, produced by the European Association for Storage of Energy and Deltaee. This time last year, the first wave of COVID was still spreading across Europe. The long-term impact was unclear and the government responses were only starting to develop. Since then, lockdowns and the ongoing need for social distancing have impacted all of our lives, and the resulting reduction in electricity demand has highlighted the growing need for new resources to help manage unexpected imbalances and instability in the grid. Today, we'll be presenting our latest research on the status of energy storage across Europe, recent trends, including the impact that the pandemic had on the energy storage industry, and our outlook for the coming year. I'll start with a brief introduction to today's speakers, who'll be presenting some of the highlights from the report, giving you an update on regulatory developments, including the ongoing implementation of the Clean Energy Package, and introducing this year's hot topic of developments in network charging and storage policy. In this area, the growth in distributed energy resources, including renewables, storage, and the electrification of transport and heat, is challenging the approach that's been developed in the industry to charge for networks over the last 20 years, and is resulting in the need for a change to the approach that's being taken. During the presentations, there will be a number of polls where we'll be asking for your perspectives. And if you have any questions during the presentations, please ask by typing them into the question or the chat function. One feature of Deltaee research services is that subscribers have access to ask questions and discuss issues with the analysts. Today, we will try to answer as many questions as we can in the time, but please do get in contact with us to continue the discussions. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce to you from the European Association for Storage of Energy, Brittany Deltaee, and from Deltaee, myself, John Ferris, Head of the Flexibility and Energy Storage Research Services, Robin A.D. Johnson, Service Manager for the Storage Product, and João Coelho, a Research Analyst. Now I'll ask Brittany to introduce herself and the European Association for the Storage of Energy.
Thank you, John. So I'm Brittany, I'm the Policy Manager at EASE. EASE has been active for 10 years now, working on representing the full energy storage sector towards the European Union institutions. We have over 50 members now working on all different types of storage, front of meter, behind the meter, commercial and industrial storage. And what we are working on is creating a regulatory framework at EU level that will be supportive for storage deployment. So I'll be giving an update later on what's been happening on the EU policy front, but I'll hand back to John first.
Thank you, Brittany. And to introduce Deltaee, we are a research and consultancy company helping our clients to navigate the transition from old energy to new energy, a world that's moving from centralized to decentralized, carbon intensive to low carbon, and from commodity sales to a much more service-oriented business model, considering meter points, moving to a customer-centric view, and where value isn't just upstream, but value is increasingly downstream and within the customer activity. We offer focused subscription research services in areas including e-mobility, heating, and new energy business models, as well as bespoke consultancy to our clients who include networks, retailers, aggregators, and manufacturers, as well as government and regulatory bodies. And so to the European Market Monitor on Energy Storage, where the 5th edition is bigger and better than ever before, and is the result of continuous primary research from the team into the status and trends of storage markets across Europe, which have been analysed by country and major market segments. The report itself and the underlying data is provided to all members of EASE and subscribers to the Deltaee storage service, but is also available to purchase from EASE, and we'll be sharing details of who to contact later on. So I'll now hand over to João, who will present some of the key findings from the 5th European Market Monitor on Energy Storage.
Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. My name is João Coelho, and I'm a research analyst at Delta. As John has said, I'm going to be running through the data that we have compiled to elaborate the report. Also, the key findings and the key trends that we have identified when doing so, and our forecasted projections of which directions the market is estimated to go in the next coming years. I'll try to. I cannot go through the next slide. There we go. So before I do that, actually, I would like to launch a poll. So to just ask the attendees a question: what impact do you think COVID-19 has had in the storage market in 2020? I will give you just 30 seconds to answer. Apologies of making it time constrained, but we also need to jump into other things. So just feel free to share your opinion. Almost coming to an end now. Few more seconds. And I believe that we can close it. Here are the results. And okay, it's a pretty big domination of the supply chain disrupted. Also a reference to workforce unable to access sites, yes, and reduced workforce, illness, the layoffs, furlough. Interesting to see your views, and exactly, I mean, it's a fair point. It was what is expected from a current pandemic state. Lockdowns, a lot of countries were hit hard by lockdowns this past year. So now on to resuming the presentation. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So now I thought it would be nice to start as a market overview. Just bear in mind that this graph and the information that is described here in this overview only accounts for electrochemical energy storage. So to compile the report, we only looked at electrochemical. We did not account it for hydropower, pumped hydro, or thermal storage. As you can see, there is a continuous growth in the number and in the annual installed base of installations from 2016 to 2020. This growth has been also significantly continuous if you look at behind the meter installations. So you see residential and C&I having a significant growth in each year. But I think that the major key point and the major thing to grasp from this overview is that, as you can see, front of meter installations, they have been having quite a large market share and quite a large of the percentual annual capacity coming from front of meter installations in the recent years. In fact, in 2020, front of meter accounts for more than 50% of the total installed capacity, And also, as something that might strike the viewers, is the apparent stagnation, the apparent market stagnation that happened in 2019. Well, this is very simple. It's due to the EFR tender that happened in Great Britain. So in order to accommodate this tender, and not for Great Britain to meet this tender, a lot of front of meter installations had to be commissioned in the year previous, so in 2018. So this actually explains why there was a stagnation of the market, but the number of front of meter installations in 2018 is by far larger than the one on 2017 and 2019, not only proportionately, but also in terms of the megawatts being installed. The results of 2020, I'm going to be, as it's the core focus of the webinar, I'm going to be disclosing further on. But also, I would like to focus your attention, if we move on to by clicking on a little forward, to the growth that is going to be forecasted and expected in 2021. So we foresee a larger growth in 2021 rather than in 2020. I mean, also due to countries recuperating from the COVID pandemic, which is going to imply a higher number of installations on residential and C&I, but also front of meter is going to be huge in the next few years and in 2021. This is due to the fact that value streams are starting to opening up for energy storage, and also countries have been strengthening their position in fulfilling their 2030 renewable energy targets. If we go through the next slide, I'm going to be focusing now on the 4 key trends that we have identified in 2020. So I'm just going to do a quick run through the trends. I'm going to be describing them further on into the next slide. So the first one that we see is front of meter projects dominating the landscape of the market, and also the storage duration associated with those front of meter projects being increased. I'll explain that in a minute. New value streams are starting to opening up for battery storage. As we will be able to see, this is not something that is exclusive to large scale storage. It's also behind the meter. The next one that we have identified is that EU countries have started to strengthen their national energy climate plan action and implementation through the introduction of market reforms. And lastly, but unfortunately not least, the effects that COVID-19 have had in the overall state of the market, mostly largely in behind the meter installations, which was felt in different levels, as I will be describing in the next slide, which is the trend overview, and in here going into a higher level of detail in each of those trends. So on the first one, basically the large uptake in front of meter installations has been due to the incoming renewable generation, and so we see more countries, in order for them to achieve 2030 renewable targets, they have been introducing more solar power parks, wind power parks. So renewable generation is starting to be implemented in each country, and the problems that come with it, which is the intermittency of supply, the reliability of that same supply to meet the growing demand, it's going to create problems in terms of grid congestion, voltage control, grid constraints. And in order for countries to tackle this, they have also starting not only to increase the number of installations in large utility scale storage, but that same duration associated with each product is actually increasing for them to be able to better match that same intermittency and unreliability that renewable generation can come with. On to the next trend. It's the one referring to the value streams that have been starting emerging to storage. And here we have seen that more and more now each country and different markets have started to allow battery storage and storage in general to participate in ancillary services markets, with a major focus on frequency regulation services. Examples of this are the already commercial FFR market in the Nordics, the new FR market in Italy, which has just introduced its first tender in 2020, and the dynamic containment in Great Britain. Going on to the next trend, which is the one referring to the clean energy plan implementation and the market reforms associated with countries striving for achieving that. We have seen that not only the COVID-19 recovery plan is aiming for extending investment for renewable technologies, which storage also is included in. But also we see also that in a lot of countries they have been introducing market reforms, not to bear just to the structure of the market per se, but also to services and activities that are going to implicate that same market of storage to grow. Two examples of this are in the case of Spain, where a legislatory framework is now being introduced to allow double charging to end in 2021. Hungary, for example, is going to phase out net metering in the middle of this year. So countries are actually engaged into making these changes to come into life. And lastly but not least, well, the pandemic, which has had a deep impact, yes, in behind the meter installations. However, I would like to state that this impact was not felt in all regions. Italy and Great Britain, yes, the impact was greatly severe, and it's due to the fact that, well, pandemic, large lockdown periods. In Italy, the super bonus was only starting to be implemented in the middle of the year. Germany and the Nordics, for example, have had a slight growth. Germany, lockdown was not hit as severe. The Nordics, Sweden, for example, have had practically a non-existent lockdown period. Also, their subsidies, their existing subsidies were enlarged and were upgraded, which accounted for PV and storage, which was lovely news for Swedish companies. And Iberia, surprisingly, have had, as I will be presenting on the next slide, actually, have had a reasonable growth. Well, a substantial growth, I must say, in terms of behind the meter installations due to market reforms that they have conducted, even though that they had, as we all know, a greater impact with a tougher lockdown. If we go on to the next point that I would like to discuss with you, I would like to launch yet another poll and another question for the audience. Besides Germany and GB, which country or region do you think that will grow the fastest for energy storage in the next 3 years? You have, again, 5 different options, and again, 30 seconds to make up your mind and to give your answers. Almost done. Just a couple more seconds for you all to deliver your answers, and I believe that we can close it. Let's look at the results, and it is a major one, a major victory, let's say, for Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, Portugal. And followed by Belgium, Ireland, and the Netherlands. I mean, it's, yes, well, with what we see of the market as well, it's our view, as I will be able to demonstrate and to go through in the next slides. Just here, I thought it would be, so we have looked at the overview, we have looked at the key trends and the key takeaways that we can take from the reports, and now I felt that it was also useful for me to present to you in each sector, so residential, C&I, and front of meter, what were the markets that had the biggest and the most interesting growths and developments. In residential, it's Iberia, hands down. The market has grown by a tenfold as far as we have gathered information from, due to the fact that, and it's basically due to Spain, let's be honest, with the self-consumption tax being lifted in 2020, which was a massive news for storage. The country has adopted regional subsidies that not only account for PV, but also account for storage. Some of them even account for storage plus PV, and through different levels, grants, capex incentives, reductions. So the market has managed to grow. So the market now is 10 times larger than the growth that was registered in 2019. For the CNI sector, and here you can see this basically it's the number of annual installations in terms of megawatt hours. You can clearly see the impact that COVID has had not only on the CNI market, but also on a business case, which is the CNI business case for storage, which does not stack up in the way that both residential and front of meter do. So, however, we have seen that in 2020, Central Eastern Europe have managed to break sort of the, so to speak, the chain of the market trend and register a big uplift in installations. This is largely due to the role of one country in particular. Slovenia has had 2 large installations in the end of 2019 and in 2020 of 2 energy storage installations near large and heavy industry. They total 28 megawatts, and they are already participating in the country's secondary reserves, so the AFRR market. If we jump now onto front of meter installations and to the front of meter sector, we see that the Nordics have had a substantial growth, and will have a continuous one in the next coming years. And again, this is due to the fact that, for example, Finland has had a massive wind power park commissioned in 2020. Sweden is having a clear focus in moving to the hybridization of existing hydropower dams. They have also started to look into standalone storage as a way to mitigate grid constraints and to solve congestion issues that they are a constant in the country due to the discrepancy between large generation in the north, a high demand in the south. And now jumping from the market focus, and now you might be thinking, okay, well, so these countries have had an incredible development in 2020, but how do this development fare in the overall cumulative capacity of those same sectors? And what are the changes going to be in 2021? The simple answer is that for behind the meter installations, not much is going to change. As we can see on residential, Germany largely dominates the market, even though that Iberia had a tenfold increase, the market share that it occupies on the overall, it's very scarce. In CNI, the same situation, Germany also leading, and the scenario does not seem to be changing in the future. Central Eastern Europe here has had a massive uptake. Also safe to say that Germany, the behind the meter market is coming into a saturation point. So the market is already become so stabilized that not a lot of development is expected. So the growth rate is actually becoming narrower, which can allow for other countries to pick up the pace and to actually increase their market share. And this is the major focus point of attention, which is the front of meter landscape that I'm going to show to you. So this is the forecasted percentual growth in 2021 of the country's annual installations in 2020. So basically what we see here, it's a clear trend that even though that Germany and the UK clearly dominate the cumulative and the total amount of installed capacity in the overall front of meter market, countries like Italy, Nordics, and the Netherlands and Ireland as well are going to have just this tremendous growth in the next coming years. And quite simply, I mean, Italy, it's due to the fact that, well, as I explained, the new FR market has been accepting its first tender. It has closed into 230 megawatts, I believe, and it's going to be delivered. They are going to be delivered in 2024. The market, out of these 230 megawatts, 50% or more than that, it's related with storage. Ireland, their DS3 market is enabling renewable penetration, and also a 100 megawatt project is going to be commissioned in the first quarter of this year, with another one following suit in the short term. We believe that also is going to occur in the end of 2021, maybe 2022. The Netherlands, it's an interesting case. More than 30 megawatts of co-located storage have been installed in 2020, and we project that the country is going to have a massive storage uptake regarding front of meter installations due to the growing solar boom that it has been verified. Now over to Brittany to give us just a little explanation on CEP implementation.
Thank you very much, João. If I just come in here, we are starting to get some questions coming in, including whether the slides will be available after the presentation. And the answer to that is yes, we will be sharing the slides with attendees, although there is, as you've described, a lot more detail and data in the actual reports. So please do keep your questions coming, and we'll answer them after the presentations. Over to you, Brittany.
Thank you. You can already go to the next slide. So one of our focus areas at EASE, obviously, is the Clean Energy Package implementation and more broadly, EU policy for energy storage. So we also include in the report an overview on what's happening in the EU, and then in the country overviews, you can see what's happening in each member state. Of course, it can take some time from the EU level policy to be implemented at national level. But what we're seeing at the moment is really a very strong focus on energy transition. If you remember in March, April last year, when the COVID crisis really hit, there was a lot of concern that policymakers wouldn't really be prioritizing the EU Green Deal, which was this huge ambitious proposal that was proposed by Ursula von der Leyen when she became the commissioner. There was a lot of concern initially that the COVID crisis would kind of go to the forefront and that the green policy and the climate policy would take a backseat. But we're really happy to see that that hasn't been the case. So policymakers at EU level very clearly sent the message that the COVID-19 recovery has to be a green recovery. They've really prioritized rolling out all the different policies that are part of the EU Green Deal. I can't even list half of them on the slide. There are so many different areas. Many of them are important for the storage sector. So we have, for example, the batteries regulation, which is all about how to create more incentives for sustainability, recycling, and other topics for batteries that are produced or imported into the EU. Energy system integration and hydrogen strategies. This is really a big point for power to gas and thermal storage. There's a clear recognition of storage playing a key role in linking the electricity, gas, heating and cooling, mobility, and heavy industry sectors. So there's a lot going on there. There's a renovation wave proposal, which aims to double the rate of building renovation in the EU, which of course could also lead to a lot of funding and focus on behind the meter storage deployment. There's a revision of the renewable energy and energy efficiency directives, which were part of the clean energy package. So they were finalized in 2018, but now already there's a proposal to revise them to increase the targets to match the more ambitious 2030 decarbonization targets. And there too, we see an opportunity to increase the focus on storage and to have, for example, reduce some of the barriers to hybrid storage and renewables projects or behind the meter storage. There's a big discussion on the climate law and revising the 2030 climate targets. So EU policymakers have agreed on setting a target of 55% emissions reduction for 2030 compared to 1990 levels on the way to net zero by 2050. So that's really quite ambitious. There's also a revision on the energy and environmental aid guidelines for state aid, which could include then more state aid for energy storage. So in general, the EU Green Deal at a high level is very positive for storage. So there's a clear focus on flexibility, recognition of storage throughout all of these files. However, what we are missing a little bit, and I will touch on that a little bit later, is kind of a comprehensive strategy that's really pushing storage forward. So compared to a few years ago, policymakers are much more recognizing the role of storage, but we still don't see them going far enough in really driving storage forward. The recovery plan goes hand in hand with this because, as I said, the policymakers have really established that we need a clean recovery or green recovery that's supporting the deployment of clean energy technologies. So a big part of this Next Generation EU 750 billion euro recovery instrument is the Recovery and Resilience Facility. What's interesting there is that at least 37% of this funding must go towards climate investment and reforms. This is a mix of loans and grants. That means that at least 250 billion should be dedicated to clean energy technologies and climate spending. So that's potentially huge for storage. Right now, the member states are in the process of preparing recovery and resilience plans. These have to be submitted to the Commission by April 2021, so really quite soon. And the projects must be implemented by 2026. So it's a huge amount of funding. And I think what the member states are seeing right now as a challenge is trying to come up with ideas and proposals for projects that can be implemented very quickly. We have seen that very few member states are really on track to deliver concrete and comprehensive plans. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on. And only a few have really explicitly set aside funding for storage. So that's going to be something interesting to follow throughout this year. On the next slide, please. The other really important point that's already been mentioned here is the clean energy package implementation. So the clean energy package really creates the foundation, I would say, for storage to be deployed on the market. It has to be transposed, so the electricity directive, which contains most of the storage provisions, must be transposed into national law by June 2021. Now, some member states are really... Sorry, I can hear an echo. Okay, I think that's better now. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that, and there's a really a difference between different member states and how quickly they're implementing the different points. That includes, for example, a definition of energy storage. Sounds basic, but it's very important for storage to have a proper recognition in place in the legal framework. System operators should be taking a more active role considering storage in the network planning, ensuring access to energy markets and balancing services for storage, supporting the connection agreements and so on. There's an expanded role for active consumers or prosumers, including energy communities that would install storage behind the meter, and then rules on ownership of storage by regulated entities. So there's a lot of different areas that have an impact on storage, and you can see in the report when you go into the country level details, those countries that have already implemented the clean energy package, they're seeing already first projects coming online. So it really has impact on the sector. As I said, high level policy signals are very positive for storage. Clean energy package implementation is great, although it's a little bit slow in some areas. But what we see now from EASE is that we need a much clearer strategy at EU level for storage rollout. So I would like to ask also from the participants, Robin, if you can launch the poll, that would be great. In your view, what action by EU policymakers would have the biggest impact on storage in the next 5 years? So whether that's EU and national strategies to support storage deployment, targets for 2030 and 2050 for storage, more public funding, for example, through the Recovery and Resilience Facility or state aid or other avenues, support from policymakers for private financing of storage, such as designating storage as green in the sustainable finance taxonomy, or just accelerating clean energy package implementation at national level. So I'll give you a few seconds to respond. All right, so Robin, I think a few more seconds. I can't see the responses coming in, but I leave you to decide when to close the poll. All right, interesting. So quite a split there. Interesting to see. Yes, definitely strategies to support storage deployment. I think it could have a big impact. Private financing, okay. Clean energy package implementation is actually in the last place, so that's interesting. Thanks a lot for sharing your views. At EASE, we're really working on making all of these things happen. So all of these different policy actions, and hoping that in the coming years you'll see the impact from that in terms of what's actually happening on the market. So I'll hand over to Robin, I think.
Thanks, Brittany. The last topic to cover in the webinar is the market hot topic, which is something that we look at each year in the MS report, which is looking at issues that affect energy storage. And this year we looked at network charging. So electricity network charging is a really important topic for energy storage. It underpins much of the business case for behind the meter storage, and but it also impacts the business case for front of meter storage. I'll go into a bit of detail about this, but I think some of the really interesting things are the questions that arise when you look at the topic of network charging. So by network charges, we mean the cost that you have to pay to connect to and use the electricity network. So that's connecting to the transmission or distribution network and use of the transmission and or distribution networks. This applies to energy storage, but it applies to any other users as well of the electricity networks. And typically you're charged based on a structure which reflects your use of the transmission distribution networks and also your connection charges. And the charges, this is one of the reasons why it's complicated as a topic, and introduces a lot of inter-country variation in Europe, is that there are different elements. So you might be charged by how much electricity you're using from either importing or exporting to the network. You might be charged based on the maximum capacity or some sort of peak capacity of your power charge. There might be a fixed element which doesn't change, and for distribution networks there's also an element about reactive power. And an important point as well is how you're charged for connecting to the network. So do you just pay for the direct connection to the network, or do you also have to pay for any changes which are needed in the network to accommodate you being online? So if I'm in a big power plant, maybe there need to be some upgrades to the distribution network. Should I pay for them? And different European countries take different approaches to this issue. As I mentioned, these kind of costs impact energy storage really across all market segments. So in front of the meter assets, they don't have network charges associated with any consumption because they don't have consumption on site, but they do pay to import from the network and to export to the network. There's an interesting question around double charging. So because they're using the network twice, they're often charged twice. Some storage providers feel that they should only pay, for example, on the losses. So the losses, the energy consumed due to inefficiency in the storage system, so that the amount they export is a bit less maybe than the amount they import. Network operators, on the other hand, say that these assets are actually using the network twice, so they should pay it twice. So there's really interesting questions there around, what value are front of meter assets providing to the networks, because they're often providing ancillary services to manage frequency, or they're providing congestion relief. So they're providing a service, but they're also using those networks. Behind the meter assets, it's generally a lot clearer. The situation is that the batteries are often being put on site because the network charges that a company pays for its use of the electricity system, for whatever its core business is. That might be manufacturing, that might just be for chillers in a supermarket, that sort of thing. It's using the network and it's paying charges based on that use. And in many cases, energy storage can be used to reduce the charges that it pays. So the network operator doesn't see the battery, for example, or the energy storage system behind the meter, but it's providing value to that customer. And this use case really underpins particularly the C&I storage business case across Europe. That's not the case for residential customers, who will often just see a fixed fee for use of the network. So there's less optionality, there's less chance to reduce your network charges as a residential customer than there is for customers, at larger scale behind the meter. And as I mentioned, there's the issue of double charging, which kind of impacts mostly front of meter assets, but it also does impact some behind the meter assets a bit. And this is an area of really active policy reform across Europe. So system operators are looking at how their energy systems are changing as part of the energy transition, how demand is changing, patterns of demand, how generation is changing. It's now being much more embedded in distribution networks. We've got energy storage, we've got electric vehicle charging, we've got the electrification of heat. And so system operators are really interested, and regulators are really interested in how they can set up price signals, for example, and recover the costs associated with operating their networks. And so they're really looking at these topics in quite a lot of detail. Some interesting things that have been happening, for example, behind the meter in the UK, there have been some recent changes to network charging which have really impacted the business case and reduced the business case for storage behind the meter. The targeted charging review was the kind of name for the regulatory process that's happened, and it's removed the chance to reduce your network charge for many customers, and that's really impacted the business case. And we've seen the market for commercial industrial storage in the UK really fall off as a result of that change. Another way that things are moving, for example, in places like Belgium and Norway, residential customers are being given some optionality over their use of the network, so they're being given the option to reduce their network charges, which is something that energy storage can do. The difficulty for residential customers is that actually, network charges are only a small proportion of your electricity bill. So even though you could alter your charges, the maximum amount you can change them by is relatively limited. But obviously it becomes more interesting once you've got things like electric vehicle chargers in your home, heat pumps, that sort of thing. I should mention as well that these don't just impact electrical energy storage, things like batteries, but they also impact, for example, power to gas, power to heat. And if you've got something like a kind of a low temperature heat pump, thermal storage, which uses a heat pump to boost the temperature of a heating system, then all of this electricity use is impacted by your network charges, and you often have to pay network charges on it. So this is really quite a cross-cutting issue, but it's a really important one, I think, that people bear in mind. There's a lot of complexity across Europe, but yeah, it's something that we're interested in researching, and impacts right across energy storage markets. So I'll hand back over to John Ferris now.
So thank you very much to Robin, Brittany and João for those presentations. We have a number of questions that have come in from the audience, so please do keep submitting your questions. But before we go to them, I will start by reflecting on the first poll. That I find it quite interesting to see that the supply side issues were seen as having a much more of an impact in the reduction in growth compared to demand side issues. So one question, particularly the first one, the leading answer on the supply chain, we're hearing more and more about a global chip shortage in the news at the moment. So do any of the panels have a view on whether we will be able to overcome the supply side issues this year, or whether that's still going to have an impact restricting the growth of energy storage?
I could chime in here, John. I think from speaking to a lot of the people we spoke to during the research process, we found that although there were some shortages on the supply side, actually many of those have been resolved. So, for example, if that's equipment and components coming from Asia, for example, many of the Asian lockdowns ended actually before the European lockdowns really, while the European lockdowns were continuing. And so actually some of those supply chain issues of components coming from Asia have been relaxed. There's also the growing kind of awareness of the need for a local energy storage manufacturing capability in Europe, and I think that's probably something Brittany would be has some comments on from a European perspective. So the supply chain issues that we did see, I think, are easing, and they're easing partly because they've relaxed across on a global perspective, but also because Europe is taking its own initiative now in developing some of these capabilities.
Thank you, Robin. So yes, there is another related question that has come in about the the growth of battery manufacturing in Europe. So Brittany, did you have any comments in that regard?
Yes, sure. So EU policymakers for a couple of years now have really been prioritizing the creating or strengthening the EU battery storage manufacturing value chain. So there's been the European Battery Alliance and a couple other initiatives from the EU side to really drive innovation. And you've seen a lot of public funding also going into some battery projects that were designated as important projects of common European interest. So they're allowed to receive state aid. There's a lot of activity there from the EU side. And as a result, probably, of all this work from EU policymakers, they're predicting that by 2025, the EU will be the second biggest manufacturer of batteries worldwide after China. So it seems to be having an impact, and that's a really interesting development that we've been following over the last few years. Although I would just say at EASE, we think it's positive, but our view is that EU policymakers are not focusing enough on creating the market for storage deployment. So it's not enough to just push the supply side, but we also need to work on the demand side and making sure that the market is there for storage to really have a strong business case.
Thank you, Brittany. And I think that was reflected in the answers to the third poll, where the leading answer was the lack of a comprehensive strategy. So it's not just about the supply side or the demand side, but having a strategy that spans the whole of the value chain. So next, we have a question for João. One of the earlier questions that came in during your presentation was asking which of the countries require co-location of storage with new renewable developments.
Yeah, thank you, John. Well, this actually is a trend coming into a lot of markets. We see that the Nordics have a regulatory framework that they require new additional front of meter projects to be with co-located storage. So you're talking about solar power parks, you're talking about wind offshore and onshore projects. However, if we are going to talk about the global scale, it's a bit trickier than that, and I will give the example of the recent Spanish solar auction. So long story short, Spain was projected to have a huge number of storage installations in the most recent solar auction that they recently had, following the Portuguese one, which was expected to increase the amount of co-located battery storage in the next few years to a ridiculous, enormous amount. The problem was that the current market was not ready for accommodating storage in those same tenders and in those same auctions. Investors, they didn't have the actual financial framework to be interested in investing in doing co-located storage next to big solar power park installations. So what actually eventually happened was that approximately 3 gigawatts of renewable generation were commissioned and were installed and were attributed in that solar auction, but 0 megawatts of co-located storage was attributed. So it is, I mean, this system is going to change in the next solar auction, because the Spanish government has already established that rules are going to be amended. But it's an interesting question. I would say that the Nordics are the ones requiring it by framework, by regulation, and other countries are following their example suit.
Thank you, João. So next, we've had a number of questions coming in around regulation. So the first one is whether the EU policies are mirrored in the UK and whether they will continue to be mirrored in the UK going forward. The second question is around standards, and particularly standards for unlocking flexibility from residential in inverters. And thirdly, there's a specific question about the Spanish AFRR and MFRR markets, about the ability of storage to participate in those markets, and whether the products are adapted to facilitate the participation of storage. So, Brittany, would you like to respond to any of those questions?
Well, I can't respond on the UK side, unfortunately. We're really focused at the EU level. The other question was on market participation of storage with new system services. Yes.
Market participation of storage and the emergence of standards to enable that.
Okay, right. So yeah, I think actually the more interesting point for market participation of storage is not necessarily just the standards, although there is some work, and we're also working on this at EASE, on safety standards. There are some standardization efforts at EU level, but we're not seeing them really being implemented in a consistent way in different EU member states. But what I think is also really interesting in terms of market participation is the EU network codes, which doesn't receive as much focus as a clean energy package, but that's where you really see the more detailed implementation of different system services and standardized system service approaches and so on. So there's a lot of activity happening there. There's a proposal to amend the EU grid connection codes to include storage provisions, which could be very interesting for the storage sector, kind of harmonize how the grid connection is done across EU member states. And there's also a proposal that will be coming up later this year for a new network code on demand-side flexibility and storage. So I think that will be very interesting to follow what is going to be included there and what kind of standards or standardized approaches we'll see there.
So thank you very much, Brittany. Next, perhaps a question for Robin or João to answer on the medium-term view on the development of the storage industry. So two questions. One is highlighting the interest in long-duration energy storage in the USA, and whether there's whether we're seeing growth in longer duration in European markets. And another question about the impact that hydrogen might have on the impact on front of meter storage, and whether we fear a reduction in the short term of investment in front of meter battery storage in anticipation of hydrogen entering that flexibility market.
I can come in here, John. Although I'd be interested if João wants to add anything afterwards. On the hydrogen question, I think in the short term, I don't see an enormous threat to the kind of traditional front of meter battery market, simply because you can install a front of meter battery in a relatively short space of time in some countries, for example, the UK, where it's economically interesting as a business case, and the payback period is now that people are kind of looking at some of the, some merchant models, looking at taking advantage of volatility in wholesale markets, that sort of thing, understanding value stacking for these large systems. I think there is a business case for those, and there is a business case at the moment, and therefore the kind of hype around hydrogen, although I think hydrogen is definitely a potential long-term storage technology, it's still not here quite yet. If you're looking at doing things like providing frequency response, which is one of the highest value streams that batteries can tap into at the moment, hydrogen assets are not there yet in volume. It's still all about trials, and so I think that value stream is still currently interesting to front of meter storage. So I'm not particularly concerned, although I think the really interesting thing looking forward to the future, and there was a question about long-term storage, is actually what storage technologies will be useful in the future as we progress through the energy transition. And I don't think it will just be batteries. I mean, there's a business case for batteries at the moment, and there are some kind of clear kind of kind of market propositions and people taking advantage of those, but actually you've also got things like thermal storage, which are really interesting as well, which we didn't look at so much in this study. And you've got things like hydrogen then in the longer term. There's a move towards longer duration storage generally as people move away from simply focusing on short-term ancillary services. So you no longer just need a 15 or 30-minute battery, sorry. Now people are looking at sort of 1.5 to 2 hour batteries, and as the price of batteries does fall, I mean, I don't necessarily know how much further it will fall, but as it falls, even longer duration batteries become interesting. There is the question of what value streams you're going to tap into with those long duration batteries. And that's something I think that people are still trying to figure out. The optimum duration still is not longer than 2 hours really at this point for kind of electrical storage. If you look at thermal storage, perhaps I don't know the answer, but perhaps it's a bit longer.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, sorry, John. I would also like to jump in on this and focusing on. And I totally agree with Robin. And very shortly, I would like to just highlight that yes, we see that hydrogen is having a big discussion, a big ongoing discussion in the present years and in the present time. However, I mean, and yes, it's very interesting on the storage perspective. However, it's just R&D projects still, so the market and the technology still needs to figure out exactly what Robin said. So which value streams does it want to tap into, and it still has a lot of room to grow until it starts to be commercially implemented in countries. And we need to remember that front of meter storage is only now starting to see revenue coming from that same technology outside of the arbitrage scope. So now you have front of meter installations being more and more utilized for frequency regulation purposes, to participate in FCR markets, AFRR markets, markets that are also with shorter term responses and that are requiring more and more battery storage to fulfill the needs of balancing the system. So I mean, yes, do not see hydrogen to come into the picture in a short term, also because batteries are just starting to grow in terms of their market access. So they have a lot until they are as a mature technology in terms of the economics of it as for example, solar. So I do not see hydrogen as well coming into the picture for the next 3 years, 4 years, even though that's some countries.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much for that comprehensive answer, João. I'm afraid we are coming to the end of the webinar now, so I think it just leaves me to thank the audience for attending. Thank you all for your attention. I'd like to thank João, Brittany and Robin for their presentations. And just a reminder for anyone who is interested in the report, or if you have any further questions that we haven't answered, to contact Brittany or Robin on the email addresses at the bottom of this slide, or reply to the contact when we send out the slides to the attendees. Just a couple of questions that have come up that I will answer around whether the report also illustrates the markets in which batteries can participate and whether they're described in detail, and how we see the storage revenue stacks and how it varies from country to country across member states. Now, that is something that is analysed in more detail in our annual demand side flexibility market monitor, which we will be launching with the webinar next Monday, and we hope that as many of you can also attend that webinar as well. So we hope to see you again soon and hear from you if you have any questions. And thank you all for attending the webinar today.